our show started for the day. All right. Well, audience, I appreciate your patience as we begin today, and welcome to our Ask the Expert webinar. We are pleased to have you. We are pleased to introduce Dr. Arnold today. And my name is Karen Sampson Hoffman, and our Ask the Expert webinar today is Nutrition in Support of ADHD Treatment. And today's webinar is part of CHADD's National Resource Center on ADHD's Ask the Expert webinar series. The NRC is funded by the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention and provides reliable, science-based information about current medical research and ADHD management. And also today, we ask that unless you are a host, that you have your microphone muted. We are not taking any questions by voice. We will take questions on our chat later on after Dr. Arnold's presentation. So unless you are a host, if you're a host, keep your microphone on. We've got a few members of the Ask the Expert webinar team with us today. So others, though, we do ask that you mute your microphone. During this webinar, we do want to hear from you, as I said. You can ask questions or share comments at any time during the presentation. When we have our question and answer box available. If we don't get to your question today, we have health information specialists who are available Monday through Friday between 1 and 5 p.m. You can reach them at 1-800-233-4050. I am very pleased to introduce Dr. Eugene Arnold as today's Ask the Expert. And Dr. Arnold is our resident science expert for the CHADD National Resource Center on ADHD and a former member of CHADD's Professional Advisory Board. He is also Professor Emeritus of Psychiatry at Ohio State University for his work on the multi-site NIMH multimodal treatment study of children with ADHD. You may have heard of this. It is referred to as the MTA. He received the NIH Director's Award. His publications include 9 books, 70 chapters, and 300 articles. Again, we are very pleased to welcome Dr. Eugene Arnold. Doctor, it's your turn if you would like to begin today's Ask the Expert presentation.
Okay, thanks. The disclosures are probably irrelevant to what I'm talking about here today, but just to be complete, there they are. Okay. There are several ways in which diet and nutrition interact, both for ADHD and actually for all mental disorders. One of them is things in the diet that shouldn't be there. The other is things not in the diet that should be. The contaminants can be not only things like pesticide residues and heavy metal contamination and so forth, but also things like artificial food colorings and preservatives that are classified by the FDA as generally regarded as safe, but they may not be safe for some individuals because of genetic differences. The other way in which the diet may have problems is things lacking. Deficiencies can result from a variety of things, one of them being the modern agriculture, which in 2 ways may reduce the density of micronutrients in food. First, by replenishing in the soil only the big 3 or 4 minerals, leaving others out that may not be optimal in the soil. And the other thing is by breeding larger crops, you can get more per acre, but the amount of minerals in them is distributed over a larger volume so that the micronutrient density is less. And then, of course, we take that food and process it further and make it even less dense in micronutrients. And an irony is that, for example, enriched flour is called enriched, but actually all they do is put back some of the things that were milled out of it in the processing. Then some individuals, even if there were the optimal provision of recommended daily allowance, some individuals may have a genetic need for more than average or an intolerance of the usual dose. Then we have iatrogenic nutritional problems, first of all by appetite suppression, for example from stimulants, so that parents are likely to let a child who's apparently starving himself to death, he really wouldn't, but it appears that way, they're inclined to let him eat whatever he wants, which will tend to be high sugar processed foods. And then we have the possibility that the medications may result in micronutrient wasting, which I'll come back to on a later slide. So we have two dietary strategies that have been well established in mainstream medicine for years. One of them is to eliminate or restrict things that may be harmful for a given individual. For example, those with a genetic problem in handling copper, as in Wilson's disease, or some people have a genetic predisposition to hemochromatosis, so the normal amount of iron could be a problem. And and then, of course, the classical example, phenylketonuria, is a genetic deficit in handling phenylalanine, which is ordinarily in the diet. And for most people, this is an essential amino acid, but for those people, it's poison. And the solution is to provide a diet that does not have phenylalanine in it. And so we have a disorder that's 100% heritable, but also 100% environmental. And this is important to keep in mind because we hear many times that ADHD is highly heritable, 70 or 80% heritable. But that just means that it's 20 to 100% environmental because of the interaction between genes and environment. The other hallowed strategy in mainstream medicine is to provide a supplement for diseases caused by lack of it. For example, iodine for endemic goiter, myxedema madness, B12 for psychosis of pernicious anemia, thiamine for Wernicke's encephalopathy, niacin for pellagra, iron for iron deficiency anemia. Let's see here. Now, to review some of the basic biochemistry that can be found in ordinary biochemistry textbooks, such as we studied in medical school. Just look at the top. There's a mistake on the bottom part here. Just look at the top for the way the catecholamines, dopamine and norepinephrine, are manufactured within the neurons of the brain. Phenylalanine and tyrosine are changed to dopa with the coenzyme iron, along with phenylalanine hydroxylase and tyrosine hydroxylase. Then dopa is changed to dopamine with a coenzyme of B6 in the form of pyridoxal phosphate. And to change dietary B6, pyridoxine, into pyridoxal phosphate requires vitamin B2, magnesium, and zinc. Then to change dopamine into norepinephrine, you also need copper and vitamin C. So that means to make dopamine, you need 2 vitamins, 3 minerals, and an amino acid, tyrosine. For norepinephrine, you need 3 vitamins and 4 minerals. Something didn't come through here. There was a graph on this that didn't come out. But what it was showing, I'll have to describe the graph. It showed data from the U.S. Department of Agriculture regarding the percent of the U.S. population that is not getting the recommended daily allowance of basic nutrients in what they eat. There are about 20 micronutrients listed, and for 5 of those, over half the population is not getting the recommended daily allowance. And for others, many others, it's about a third. If you add up all the percents, it comes out to 700%, which means that on average, every American is having deficient intake of 7 essential micronutrients. It's more than that for some people because others would have a better diet. Then we have the iatrogenic micronutrient depletion. It's well established that anti-epileptic mood stabilizers waste various B vitamins, vitamin D, and folate, found which tend to be low in mood disorders and in some other disorders. Antipsychotics reduce iron levels. Now, what we don't know, and I wish somebody would do this study, we don't know whether the FDA-approved meds for ADHD, especially the stimulants, whether they waste any micronutrients. However, we do know they reduce appetite, resulting, as I said, in pickier, unbalanced diets because of the appetite reduction. Vegetables are not very appealing if you don't have an appetite to begin with. Did somebody say something? Oh, okay. Now, although we don't have data on wasting of micronutrients by stimulants, we do have some data for food dyes. And in 2 experiments, a pilot study and a replication done in the 90s, it was found that tartrazine, which is a yellow dye commonly found in soft drinks and other things, colored candies and so forth. And this actually, the challenge was a commercially available soft drink with tartrazine in it as a coloring. Then the replication used a 50 milligram dye challenge. In both cases, they found that serum and saliva zinc went down and urine zinc went up in hyperactive children, but not controls, when they drank the dye. And these zinc changes from the dye challenge correlated with behavioral deterioration in both studies. This 50 milligram amount is we're lacking in no, here it is important because the consumption of dye over the past 60 years has quintupled, quadrupled in the last 50 years. And in 2010, the average per capita consumption, according to the FDA data, is about 60 milligrams, or was about 60 milligrams, probably gone up since then. So it's in the range that was used in the tartrazine study and also in the Southampton studies, where they demonstrated a small but statistically significant effect for all children, not just those with ADHD, from ingesting a dye mix which was up to 50 milligrams, again about the same amount that we showed before. This slide shows the genetic interaction with that. This is a histamine gene, but there was also some interaction with the dopamine gene and other histamine genes. This particular one, on the left you have those who have the C allele present, either CT or CC, and on the right it was homozygous T allele with no C. On the left, the C allele is protective against the effect of the dye. The green triangle representing placebo is about the same level as the response mix A and mix B dye challenges. On the right, those with a C allele have a significant difference between the placebo, the green diamond, and the two challenges with mix A, which had 25 milligrams, and mix B, which had 50 milligrams. And the percent of the population who have the C allele is only 40%. So 60% of the children fell into the group who were susceptible to this genetic predisposition to having a bad response to the dye. In meta-analyses, there is also a small but significant effect found, usually about 0.25 or 0.3. This is meta-analysis by Joel Nigg, and you can see that the summary for parents is about 0.2, by teachers is about 0.15 rather. And interestingly, the objective test of attention showed a larger effect, about 0.3. So the effect that was observed was not due to teacher and parent expectation. This is a complete restricted diet, not just the dyes, but eliminating also preservatives and a few other things that were believed to be a problem. The effect does not appear greatly higher than it was with the dyes alone, so it leads you to suspect the dyes are the main culprit. We also have, by another author, Sanuga Bark, another meta-analysis, and looking at the probably blinded assessments on the right, you can see about a 0.5 effect size, which is a medium effect size from comprehensively restricted diets. And then by the same author, looking at only eliminations of artificial food colors, is about 0.4 effect size on the right by probably blinded assessments. Sugar elimination has been very controversial, with some people claiming it has an effect, others claiming it does not, and even a meta-analysis failed to show either acute or delayed effect compared to an artificial sweetener. Now, the clinker in those studies is that the comparator was aspartame, which we now know has some behavioral effect of its own, and even kind of backfires in terms of appetite. So there were a few positive studies. One of the early ones showed a difference in sugar and insulin metabolism between kids with ADHD and control children, and it actually had a calming effect in 1 hour in ADHD and 2 hours in the others. In other words, the response was quicker in ADHD. The metabolic response was quicker. Now, there's a very good biochemistry explanation for this, because when you take a sugar load, it results in an insulin response. The insulin depresses the level of the large chain amino acids in the blood, but it suppresses the others more than it does tryptophan. So the tryptophan then has a temporary competitive advantage to get across the blood-brain barrier, where it then serves as a substrate for more production of serotonin. The serotonin then having a calming effect, or the sugar blahs if you recall eating too much sugar yourself. And this happens quicker with ADHD than in others, and it's the rebound from this that parents identify as sugar making them hyperactive. It's actually the opposite. But of course you pay a price for that calming effect because you're depleting the tryptophan supply. So in terms of making sense of all this, refined sugar is not an essential food group. it's bad for your health in other ways, bad for your teeth, bad for your inflammatory situation. So that reasonable sugar restriction passes what I call the SEX criterion. SEX stands for safe, easy, cheap, and sensible. In contrast to rude, which is risky, unrealistic, difficult, or expensive. Here's some animal experiment evidence. Mice with gestational sucrose exposure had an effect on their genes, an epigenetic response. The upper left panel in this figure shows the response for the dopamine transporter, which transports dopamine out of the synaptic cleft into the neuron where it's broken down, so that you get less mileage out of the molecule. The stimulants work by preventing that reuptake, so you get more mileage out of each molecule of dopamine. In any event, though, the transporter is upregulated epigenetically by sucrose exposure in utero. On the other hand, the dopamine dopamine receptor, which carries the neurotransmission, is downregulated on the right and on the two bottom panels for 3 different dopamine receptors. Then, oh shoot, it's a shame we don't have this figure showing up. But this was a breakfast experiment done about a little over 10 years ago, 15 years ago, I guess now, that I think everybody should have a chance to see. There were 4 different conditions. One of them was no breakfast, and they plotted the inattention over time, over the morning. And no breakfast resulted in a steep curve upwards, a steep slope upwards of inattention as rated by the teacher in normal children. These were not kids with ADHD, but in normal children. Then if they had a breakfast of whole grain and milk, now that's whole grain, not Fruit Loops or Frosted Flakes, but whole grain cereal, either oats or wheat, with milk, that ascending curve was blunted and plateaued at about half the level that it reached with no breakfast. So what do you think happens if they gave them the same number of calories as the cereal and milk breakfast, but in the form of glucose? Well, the curve went to the same height as if there were no breakfast, but it went up faster, so that almost immediately it went up to the level near what it was at the end of the morning with no breakfast. So it appears that a high sugar breakfast is worse than no breakfast at all, and Grandma was right about eating a good breakfast, a high protein, low sugar breakfast. The Mediterranean diet is another thing that's kind of come up in interest recently. It was associated with less ADHD than the highly processed, calorie-dense Western diet. Mediterranean diet is essentially high in vegetables, fish, and unprocessed foods, low in refined sugar. Now remember, the association does not prove causation. It could be that those people have less ADHD for other reasons, genetic, cultural, maybe the climate, the amount of sun exposure, and so forth. So, practical dietary conclusions. Foods and additives are not a major cause of ADHD, but they contribute to it. It's important for a minority of children. NIG estimated 8% of those with ADHD and it affects most children to a small but significant degree. They may be as much a public health problem as an ADHD problem because of the fact that they affect the majority of children. So minimizing food dyes and refined sugar passes the sex criterion. If there's a specific sensitivity to a food, eliminate it. And a protein-containing low-sugar breakfast is good for children's health and function. So listen to Grandma. Let's take a look at essential fatty acids, fish oil, krill oil, marine oils in general, and gamma-linolenic acid from evening primrose oil. They're both lower than control children in those with ADHD. And you can manipulate lab animal behavior by the kind of fat you feed them. And it's been demonstrated both in laboratory animals and in children that omega-3 deficiency or N-3 deficiency can result in hyperactivity and impaired visual attention. Now, the reason this has come up is the change historically in the ratio of omega-3 to omega-6 fatty acids. Omega-3 about equal, the ratio of omega-3 to omega-6 is about equal in grass. There's not much fat in grass, but what's there is balanced. So that grass-fattened meat will tend to have a balance between the two polyunsaturated fatty acid series, omega-3 or N-6, or omega-3 or N-3. But if you feed the animals intensively with grain or eat a lot of grain fat, like corn oil, soybean oil, you have a different ratio. You have more omega-6. The reason this is important is because they compete for the desaturase enzymes. On the left, we have the omega-6 series of fatty acids, starting with linoleic acid, which is desaturated by omega-6, by delta-6 rather, desaturase, to gamma-linolenic acid, which is then elongated to gamma-linolenic acid, the precursor of the series 1 eicosanoids, the prostaglandins, thromboxane, and leukotrienes. This is further desaturated to arachidonic acid, which is precursor for the series 2 eicosanoids. On the right, you have the omega-3 series or N-3 series. Linolenic acid, dietary linolenic acid, can be desaturated to the next one. I forget the name of the next one in the chain, but then can be further desaturated and elongated to form the C20:5 omega-3, which is EPA, eicosapentaenoic acid, the precursor of the series 3 eicosanoids. And this can be further desaturated and elongated to the lower right one on the graph, which is docosahexaenoic acid, or DHA. DHA ideally constitutes 21% of the lipids in the brain, and the brain prefers that up to 21%. If there's not enough DHA or EPA for the neuronal membranes to make the ideal percentage, the brain will substitute arachidonic acid from the omega-6 series on the left, and it'll work, but it's like running a high-performance engine on low-octane fuel. It runs, but it sputters a little bit. Now, an additional thing to note here is that the series 1 eicosanoids from dihomogammalinolenic acid, and the series 3 icosanoids from EPA, both are mainly anti-inflammatory, whereas the series 2 icosanoids from arachidonic acid are mainly pro-inflammatory. So you can upset the inflammatory balance by having excess series 2. There have been over a dozen placebo-controlled trials in ADHD of essential fatty acids and 3 meta-analyses. They all point towards a small but significant benefit. Monotherapy with gamma-linolenic acid has equivocal results. DHA by itself was not effective in one trial, and the combinations of EPA, DHA, and GLA seem to be the most effective. There's an effect size of about 0.4, which is between small and medium. There's a dose response with EPA, icosapentaenoic acid, shown here, so that the more EPA that was administered, the better the effect size, the higher the effect on ADHD symptoms. However, there's a wrinkle in this, in that the studies that used more EPA also had a little bit of GLA, gamma-linolenic acid, from the omega-6 series included. And remember, that's the needed for the series 1 icosanoids. Okay, so these are the meta-analyses from for polyunsaturated fatty acids. The probably blinded assessments show about 0.3 overall effect size, a small effect, but significant, and barely significant. Note that the Arnold and Amen studies on the left, which are not included on the right, were with gamma-linolenic acid. Some of the other studies on the right included that. This is a comparison of a mixture of omega-3 and omega-6, that is the EPA, DHA, and GLA, compared to methylphenidate and the combination of methylphenidate plus the fatty acids. The upper left panel shows the effect on the total ADHD symptoms, lower score better. The right, upper right is inattention, lower, right below the lower left one is hyperactivity. And you'll notice that the dotted line, well, first take the solid line, which is the methylphenidate. And of course, it shows the expected good response immediately and continuing over time. But look at the dotted line, which starts slower, but eventually catches up to methylphenidate for inattention. And then the dashed line, which is the combination of the two, shows up a little bit better than methylphenidate alone by the end of, well, this is good by the end of 6 months, and by the end of 12 months, it's a little better. This was achieved with a 23% lower dose of methylphenidate also, which resulted in fewer adverse events because the adverse events, the side effects, are dose proportional. Then these data were from a study in child mood disorder with 95 subjects, in which 58 also had ADHD. This is from the brief, a measure of executive function, and lower score is better here, less deficit of executive function. And the effect for the combination of omega-3 fatty acids plus PEP, psychoeducational psychotherapy, was 0.7, which is comparable to adamoxetine and
pardon me, Dr. Arnold. Forgive me, Dr. Arnold, forgive me for stepping in. I just need to remind our audience, part of our technical glitch, we have some sound that is coming through. If you could check your microphones, make sure your microphones are turned off if they've come on by accident. We will not be taking questions by voice, but I think someone's microphone has turned on. Doctor, I apologize for stepping in. I am going to step back and let you continue. Thank you so much.
Okay, good. So the omega-3 fatty acids alone had an effect size compared to placebo of 0.45, which is a medium effect. In this study, they took kids who were refractory to the usual treatment. They didn't respond to methylphenidate. And the effect size compared to placebo at 3 months was large for aggressiveness and restlessness, medium for inattention. And at 6 months, it was even larger. If you go down the list, you can see completing work and waiting for turn, things like that, were a medium effect. Academic performance was a large effect even by 3 months, and larger yet by 6 months. So fatty acid supplement passes the sex criterion in moderation. If without the antioxidant vitamins, they can be kind of toxic because these are the same as what the varnish industry calls drying oils. They oxidize into a film. Also make sure they're mercury-free. It'll say on the label, refined to eliminate mercury, or USP, US Pharmacopoeia, which means drug grade, and that means that they are pure. You need 3 to 6 months for the effect. Don't expect immediate results. You have to warn people about that. EPA is possibly the most essential. And remember that flaxseed oil, which contains omega-3, may not metabolize to EPA in some patients. And the combinations of EPA and DHA with GLA have seemed to be the most effective. This is a list you can peruse at your leisure. It includes not only omega-3 fatty acids, but also zinc, iron, and some herbs. It's important to note that there are some herbs that have not been found effective in controlled trials and have potential adverse effects, such as St. John's wort, ginkgo biloba. And carnitine is not an herb. It's a natural metabolite. You make some yourself, but it's a semi-essential nutrient because it's better to have some in the diet. However, in a controlled trial, it made some kids a little more hyperactive. Apparently they had more energy. It's necessary for energy metabolism. They had more energy with which to be hyperactive. It did seem to help those with inattentive type. So it's something that might be used with caution. And I think those with a sluggish cognitive tempo might be considered if other things aren't working for them. Okay, so the Cochrane review concluded that although micronutrient deficiencies considered singly had been important in the past, We know that they interact. I showed you on a previous slide how to change pyridoxine from the diet into pyridoxal phosphate so it can be used in synthesis of catecholamines. It's necessary to have coenzymes like zinc, magnesium, and riboflavin. So they concluded that a greater effect may be achieved by multiple supplementation rather than single nutrient supplementation. So let's look at what happened. Oh gosh, you know, these figures don't seem to be showing up here. I hope that can be worked out and the slide set can be made available with the figures showing. But essentially here, this was a study in adults, and compared to placebo, the effect was 0.6 by self-rating and 0.59 by observer rating, by other people rating the individual on ADHD symptoms. So this was a strong medium effect. Let's see if anything else shows. No, this naturalist. What this showed was that those who continued taking the multi-nutrient supplement a year later was still doing as well as they were at the end of the trial. Those who switched to medication were also doing the same as at the end of the trial, and those who didn't take either medication or the nutrient reverted to their baseline scores. That was self-selected treatment. Okay, this was supposed to be an open trial in children with an on-again, off-again design. And the effect sizes that are shown there, those two bottom ones, were for on the supplement. Yeah, on the supplement. No. The first one, the effect size of 2.17, was compared to baseline on the supplement. Then the second one, effect size of 0.78, was off the supplement compared to baseline. Then they went back on, and it's not showing what that was, but the effect was even greater the second time on. And then the second time back off the supplement was actually significantly better than baseline, suggesting that the effect of the supplement tended to stick around. Once you replenish the micronutrients, even when you stop them, there tends to be some carryover of effect. Then there was a trial in children, about 90 children in New Zealand, and the overall ADHD symptom effect was not significant, but the effect on inattention showed an effect on 32% of them taking micronutrients versus only 9% on placebo. I really hope you get a chance to see these graphs. Then in that same trial, even though the effect on total ADHD symptoms was not significant, there was a significant medium effect on a conduct problem subscale, suggesting that the effect is most important in those who have mood problems or oppositional behavior in addition to their ADHD. Okay, so here's the summary. I think I've said everything on here. Oh, the doses used in these randomized clinical trials that I just showed you were not megadoses. They were not higher than the upper limit of tolerability from the standard things put out by U.S. Department of Agriculture and CDC. But they were higher than the recommended daily allowance or recommended daily intake. they were in between the recommended daily amount and the upper limit of tolerability. They were also very comprehensive. They had about 30 vitamins and minerals. By comparison, Flintstones has 11, I think, and Centrum Junior has 21. So you would want to make sure that there are at least 20 micronutrients in the whatever supplement you would be using. The ones used in the randomized trials are available on 2 websites, Hardy Nutritionals and True Hope, but they're rather expensive, so you might want to try just doubling up on ordinary vitamins. One risk, by the way, of the really comprehensive ones is they may interact with drugs, especially non-stimulant drugs. So if somebody has a lot of drugs on board, you'd want to start out cautiously. So overall then, you want to minimize food dyes, processed foods, and sugar, maximize vegetables and fruit. Organic if it's affordable, but doesn't really have to be. You can just wash thoroughly. I use a pot scrubber on things with a thick skin, or you can just, there's a thing called Fit. You can soak them in to help get rid of pesticides. A high-protein, low-sugar breakfast is essential. Wild ocean fish 2 or 3 times a week, or daily fish oil. And at least the RDA, RDI multivitamins and minerals with at least 20 ingredients. And in the winter, make sure there's at least 1,000 international units of vitamin D for people at above the Mason-Dixon line, especially if they have dark skin. We found in a recent study in Ohio that about 50% of the kids, even at the end of summer, were insufficient in vitamin D. And in North Carolina, about 25% were deficient in vitamin D. So that's one to pay special attention to, and it should be consumed with a fatty meal for sake of absorption. It can be part of the multivitamin if there's enough in the multivitamin, but they don't all have that much. Okay, that winds up the presentation.
Wonderful. Well, Doctor, thank you so much for going through and offering this informative presentation, and your patience also with a few technical difficulties. From what we understand is there was a difficulty. Some of the images that you had on your slides, our system didn't bring them over, but we believe that they are there on our PDF on the handout. So for our participants, you can download a copy of that handout, and it will have the images that Dr. Arnold was referring to. So I am opening up our question and answer box now, and you will see that appear on your screen. And to our participants, please go ahead and enter your questions. We are looking forward to them. And one of our first questions that we do have, Doctor, you mentioned the omega-3s and the differences between DHA and EPA, I believe they were. Forgive me if I've used the wrong letters in describing them. If someone was to go and look for a supplement, what type of fish oil or omega-3 supplement should someone look for, especially since there are so many choices on the health food shelf?
Yeah, well, as I mentioned, make sure it's free of mercury. The dose that I'd recommend would be about 1 gram, and you don't have to go for a real expensive one. However, I believe that those that have a mix of EPA, DHA, and GLA are probably a little better, but you could, if it's a lot more expensive, you could make your own mix by taking fish oil and evening primrose oil or borage oil. There's also another thing that I didn't mention that is worth bringing up, and it actually has an FDA indication. There's a thing by the brand name of Vyaran, V-A-Y-A-R-A-N, which has the omega-3 fatty acids incorporated into phosphatidylserine. Phosphatidylserine has a cholesterol backbone and then the phospholipid group, which is what makes it phosphatidyl, and a serine molecule. And then the third thing is a fatty acid. And they substituted for the saturated fatty acid on that, substituted a EPA and or DHA. And this, in the studies that I saw, actually had an effect size close to 1. It was a large effect. It has an FDA indication, and some insurance plans will cover it, but if they don't cover it, it's about $75 a month. And the company will give the third month free in order to make sure that people try it for 3 months, which, as I said, you need to do to see the full effect for 3 months.
Wonderful. Well,
so I think there probably will be other brands of that come out.
Well, that sounds like something that could be very helpful for a lot of our participants, and something that they may want to discuss with the doctor, because I understand that that does come by prescription. Our next question comes from Amy, and she is referring back that you mentioned something about low sugar breakfast, and she's wondering, is there a range of grams of sugar that would meet the criteria? What would qualify as a low sugar breakfast?
Well, less than a teaspoon, or a teaspoon or less, which is about 5 grams, I would say. Now, one thing about sugar is, and fat for that matter, is that you can wean yourself down. You can, if somebody's eating two teaspoons of sugar on their cereal, you can go to 1 teaspoon for a while, and then eventually you might get to the place where just putting some fruit on it will provide enough sweetness, and there's a little bit of lactose in the milk, so you get some sweetness from that also. Similarly, and I don't recommend this for children, but for adults who are trying to limit their fat intake, you can go from 3% milk to 2%. After you use that for a year, you can go to 1.5%, and so on down. And eventually, skim milk will taste fine to you. Tastes are acquired, and unfortunately, a lot of people have acquired a taste for sugar, and tapering that down, weaning off of it, will be.
Thank you. And sugar is one of those things that we're hearing more and more about, how the body comes to crave sugar over time. And you mentioned, as you were talking earlier, about the effects of sugar and how that it can have a calming effect, but you preceded that with the information on artificial colors and artificial flavors and how that can affect some children. What about the combination of those? I'm thinking very often, let us say candy canes at Christmas. What is the effect of that? Double trouble there. What is the effect? We hear very often, don't give candy to children, it'll affect their ADHD. Where do you think the idea has come that perhaps, is there something to the idea that the candy will make ADHD symptoms worse?
Well, I think you just explained that. It has between the sugar and the and whatever artificial colorings are in it. But the other thing is that it doesn't have many vitamins and minerals. So if you're filling up, if you're meeting your daily calorie requirement from things, highly processed, sugary things, then you're not eating vegetables,
Thank
fruit,
you.
and
Well, we've got a question
things
from
like
Melissa,
that
and
would
she's
provide
wondering about
the
the
vitamins and
crossover
minerals.
between tic disorders and Tourette's and ADHD, since we know that they very frequently co-occur. And she was wondering if you have any recommendations for when tic disorder, ADHD co-occurs, and we're talking about supplementation, foods that may help either or both condition.
Yeah, I'm not an expert on Tourette's, and I I don't know of any data showing an effect on Tourette's, but it can't help but be good for somebody to follow the recommendations that I outlined for the general health, and it may have some benefit for other things other than ADHD. Probably would help mood disorders, for example. Um, and well,
All right, not a problem.
as I said,
Well, we are going a little bit long
I
today,
just
so
don't
we're
know
going to
about
ask 2 more
Tourette's.
questions
So
before we
there's
wrap
no
things
point in
up
me
today.
continuing
So
to talk
to our
about it.
audience, if you have any additional questions, now's the time to put them in. We have our question now from Sylvina, and she is referring back to dopamine, and she asks, is there any specific food or type of food that can help with our metabolism to produce more dopamine?
Well, the amino acids tyrosine and phenylalanine are the substrate for producing dopamine, and I mentioned the minerals and vitamins that are involved in that. Um, so that would I don't really recommend taking straight amino acids generally because the liver what will happen, you can get an immediate effect from that, but over time the liver will adjust to, quotes, detoxify them. The liver will interpret a load of a bare amino acid as a kind of toxin and will try to get rid of it. However, if you just eat meat, cheese, fish, dairy products, or for that matter, beans and other legumes that have the and nuts that have the complete protein in them, that will provide plenty of substrate, and it will be balanced.
All right. Well, we are offering our last 2 questions now, and the first
So
of the last
that, I
is
don't
from
know
Liz,
anything
and
more you
she's
can do.
wondering, is L-theanine, and I'm not sure I'm pronouncing that correctly, L-theanine a good idea for kids? Oh, thank you. Is this something that would be helpful?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, L-theanine. I've seen it be helpful for aggression. Um, Again, you want to be moderate in that, and if you don't have a good reason for giving it, I wouldn't do it because it is an amino acid. But it does seem to, I've seen it help a little bit with aggression. Now,
All right. Well, this is our last question today. As I said, we did go a little bit long today, and it comes from Tamara, and she was wondering, for children who are not gaining weight while they're taking a stimulant medication, do you have any strategies or suggestions rather than letting them eat what they want? How can we get children whose appetites may be suppressed to have a wider variety of foods that are helpful for them?
Yeah. Yes, first of all, they won't starve to death. Eventually, they will get past the appetite suppression. And in fact, there's a problem with one of the long-term consequences of stimulant medicine it turns out to be obesity because the impulse control and other things, and it's not clear exactly what the stimulant does in the long term for that, but it's no longer used for weight reduction because it just doesn't work for that. But in the meantime, make sure they eat a good breakfast. That keeps cropping up here. As they take their stimulant. The stimulant doesn't take effect for a half hour, so they can take the stimulant, then eat a good breakfast. Okay, so you got that end of the day taken care of. Then, on the other end of the day, if they don't feel like eating dinner, just cover the plate, put it away, and bring it out for a bedtime snack. The microwave is a wonderful invention. And so they're getting the basic good nutrition rather than snacking as their appetite comes back towards bedtime. In fact, some of them will get voracious in the evening. So be sure you have.
All right. Well, Doctor, thank you so much. That's all the time we have today. I want to thank you, Dr. Arnold, for being with us, and I'd like to thank our participants for joining us. This has been a wonderful presentation, and you've offered so much information that I know our participants will be very interested in the recording. We will have the recording up and available before the end of the week, so check with us. I think it'll be probably Thursday that we will have this up and ready for our participants to view again. If you've enjoyed this webinar, please take a look at other webinars we have available on our webpage, and you can visit us at help4adhd.org/asktheexpert. That's help, the number 4, adhd.org/asktheexpert. We are interested in our participants' feedback. It's very important to us. It helps us plan our upcoming webinars. And shortly I will have a poll appear, and if you could take just a moment to answer our 5 brief questions. If you have any questions or are looking for information that we were not able to touch on today, please give us a call at 1-800-233-4050 Monday to Friday from 1 to 5 p.m. and you can speak with one of our health information specialists. This has been a presentation of the National Resource Center on ADHD. We are a program of CHAD. Again, I want to thank Dr. Arnold for spending some time with us, and I would like to thank our participants for spending the day with us. This does conclude our webinar.